guys, and welcome to this episode of Rematch. Today I'll be pre-reviewing Lords of the Fallen, which is coming out on the 28th of October for the Americans, and for us Europeans it will be the 31st of October. Now, this game is a hack and slash action role-playing game, and it's being developed by CI Games and Net 13 Interactive. It's also being published by Square Enix, and that's quite good. They're good publishers, so we've got a nice combination there. I haven't really heard of the developers, but it's always nice to get new developers in games. This game is a single-player game, and it'll be coming out on the next-gen consoles, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. It's also available for PC, so don't worry, PC people, we've still got this game. The price is pretty much the same for the consoles. It's £44 for Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Obviously, they might vary from where you get them from, but that's the general price. And for PC, it's £25, so it's quite a good price decrease for us PC players. And that's the general information about Lords of the Fallen. So let's kickstart with the story. Now, in the story, you are given a main character to play, and this main character is called Harkin. And basically, you are a prisoner. You have defied government, and because of this, you are in prison. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that whenever a criminal is convicted, or whenever someone does something wrong, whatever they did wrong is marked on their face in the form of a rune. So you can never get rid of that injustice that you committed. I quite like that idea. It's very interesting, and it makes me gravitate towards the story a bit more. So we play a criminal, and the rulers of the place where we are basically decide they want to get rid of all of evil. Can they banish evil entirely? But whilst they're cooking up this plan, which doesn't sound too great if you're a criminal like Harkin, demons basically swallow up the earth, and the old gods that they thought they defeated come back alive and attack everyone. And because of this, the rulers decide, instead of banishing all evil, why not use the criminals to fight the evil? So fire with fire. So Harkin, instead of facing imminent doom, is released from his sentence with his master Kaslo. Gosh, my pronunciation again. But yes, with his master. And they basically venture off to defeat all of the demons that are attacking. So they basically go off and they fight for their redemption, and they try to enter the demon hub, the heart of the demon world, Rogar, and just annihilate them. So there we go. It's a bit like an Oblivion start in a Bethesda game. Start off as a criminal and become a hero. You know, it's about that anti-hero becoming a hero. But that's what we have here. And that's the premise of the story, which for me sounds very, very interesting. Now, the developer said that this game won't follow a linear storyline. So obviously you go from A to B, but they said that depending on the decisions you make within the game, these are moral decisions, and the alliances you forge with certain groups or factions, the ending of the game can split off into three. So you can have a good ending, a bad ending, and one that's kind of in the middle for all those people that love sitting on the fence. So this game offers us different endings in terms of the story. So that adds replay value. And that is the story of Lords of the Fallen. That's what we know so far. That's what the developers have given away. And that's the adventure we're setting out on. We're setting out to seek forgiveness. Right, it's time to move on to gameplay. And there is a lot of gameplay stuff to talk about, because I've watched a lot of the first 7 minutes of the game and all that kind of stuff, where the developer is talking about the gameplay. And there is a lot to cover, because it's a role-playing game with hack and slash, and that's a lot of different mechanics squeezed into a game. Now, I will briefly mention this, but Lords of the Fallen has been compared to Dark Souls quite a lot. You know, people saw Lords of the Fallen as a teaser and was like, oh, expansion to Dark Souls? Awesome. But it's not. This is its own standing game, and they did say that they took a lot of inspiration from Dark Souls, hence the comparisons. But the comparisons do end when it comes to gameplay, as certain factors about the gameplay are a bit different, but it's pretty much the same. So let's cover some of those gameplay elements now. The developers have said that the game in terms of its difficulty is very similar to Dark Souls, but it is more forgiving. So if you do die, you won't always lose your XP like in Dark Souls, and there are save points before big bosses, so you won't have to backtrack miles when you die in a big boss fight. Now, the way that you can save your XP when you die is that when Harkin dies, he leaves a ghost in the place that he died. So if you can reunite yourself with the ghost before it floats away to the underworld, then you'll be able to regain all your XP and a random buff when you get that ghost. Another interesting thing about the ghost is that if you don't pick up your ghost, but you fight around your ghost, the ghost gives you certain boosts on your skills. So sometimes it's not always the best option to absorb your ghost. If you're fighting a big boss, leave it floating around for a bit. It will help you out with boosting your stats, but you will lose the XP, so it's a bit like a 50-50. Get your XP back, boost your stats, ghosts. That's what we've got in this game. Like Dark Souls, Lords of the Fallen has massive enemies and huge bosses, and the enemies are very varied. The developers did not want this game to feel very repetitive when you're fighting. And therefore we've got loads of different enemies here that have their own fighting style, and every time you come back from dying, they will employ different tactics to try and kill you. So one enemy, for example, is blind, and therefore moves very, very erratically because their movement is based on your character's movement. So if you make a lot of noise, then they will find you and come for you. So if you make a lot of noise and then run for it, no doubt they'll just attack the wall where you have been. So that's pretty cool. You've also got ranged enemies, dual-wielding enemies, massive enemies holding huge axes. So we've got a lot of different enemy types here. We've also got enemies that are just pure magical. And from the gameplay, they look the hardest to take down. We also have big bosses in Lords of the Fallen, which will probably mark the end of the level. Now, unlike the enemies in the games, the bosses do seem quite repetitive, because no matter how many times you come back and have to defeat them, the bosses will always follow the same pattern of movement. The bosses also have a health bar, which is split into 4 sections, and once you've got one health bar down, the boss will basically change their style of fighting because you'll destroy some of their armor and make them lighter, and then they'll change their attack. But you always know that when that bar is down, they will change their attack. So it's a bit more, you can judge it. But they haven't taken away the difficulty by doing this, because you still have to die a great many times to actually know what's coming next. So we've still got that. Never rush into a fight and kill an enemy. You've got to think about their movements, how you're going to counter those movements, where you're going to be, because if you get one thing wrong, back to the save point, let's go find the ghost. So we've got those similarities there with Lords of the Fallen and Dark Souls. You've got big enemies that have their own kind of personality, and because of that, going into a fight, it's a very strategical thing. You can't just run in there, swords are swinging. You've got to think about where you're putting everything. So this brings me on to the combat. Now, there are 11 weapon types, each with different attributes and weight. And you can only use these certain weapons depending on your attributes. So if you pick up an axe, you might need to have strength 15 to wield it. So if you've only got a strength of 8, you will actually get damage taken off from the axe, because you don't have enough strength to even lift it. So the developers have given us a range of weapons, each with their own personality. The developers also haven't restricted weapons, so you can be quite an agile, fast character, but still wield a massive axe if that's what you want to do. That way you can be in and out, lots of damage quickly. They haven't restricted the weapons to a certain class, but obviously if you do want to be agile and have a massive axe, then you've just got to put your perks on the attributes that a warrior would usually. So you'd have to put more points into strength instead of agility. But they said it is possible to have the weapons over any class, and it's the same with the armor that you pick up. Any armor or weapons you pick up, they can be used on any class. They're not restricted to a certain class. You've just got to make sure that the attributes that they need, you have. This game also has a weapon called a gauntlet, and the gauntlets act as a magical slingshot instead of a staff, for example. So you can go around, punch enemies, or throw things out of them. And in the gameplay, one of the devs was showing that the gauntlet can shoot like a grenade and blow enemies up, or it can shoot projectiles, which is almost like a gun, and then it also has a blast or a cone attack, which is like a shotgun. So these gauntlets kind of bring in modern day warfare in an old setting and kind of infused with magic. So that sounds exciting. This brings me on to the magical elements of this game. Now there are 3 classes, and each class has a certain spell tree with it, which you cannot change. So when you start off being a rogue, you will have 3 different kind of spells associated with the rogue, and you can only use those out the game. You can level up those spells, but you can only use those. You can't use the warrior spells. You are only given the rogue spell tree, and that's how it works. You're given 3 spells which can upgrade over time. The magic is also separate from the combat. So when you are leveling up, you have 2 leveling up trees. You've got your melee and your magic. And you can either put attributes on your melee or your magic, and that's how the leveling works. The developers said that there is only one difficulty setting in Lords of the Fallen, and the way that the difficulty setting can be basically easier is that if you take an approach to the game which is purely magical, the game will be a lot easier than if you do not approach the game in a magical style, because the magic in the game is basically spectacular and powerful, and it does a lot of damage. So if you want to go through this game and have a bit of an easier time, I would say put all of your attributes into your magic, because magic in this game is a force to be reckoned with. So that is how the magical tree works. So for example, the cleric class, their spell tree is very much focused on weakening enemies. So you can create a clone of yourself which will distract the enemy and weaken it, which will give you time to either take a health potion or get around behind it. Furthermore, the devs have made it so when you want to replay the game, more magic trees will be available to you. So on the second playthrough, if you choose to be a rogue, the rogue magic tree will be available to you, and so will the warrior magic tree. So therefore, there's another element there that makes you want to replay this game, to experience the different magics and obviously to see different endings to the game. And that is the sum up of magic. Now before we go on to classes, I'm just going to mention some little tidbits of gameplay which are just little bits of interesting gameplay for you. The weapons that you pick up have crafting slots in them, and you can put in rune, which basically make your weapons better. So you can infuse one weapon with a rune that will make it flaming, or a weapon that will always level up with you, which is probably an amazing buff to have on a weapon, one that levels up with you, because then it will always be able to kill the enemies throughout the game. Another interesting thing is that when you get to a save point, you can bank your XP. This way, when you die, you will still have the same XP you had before, because the save point saves the XP you have, and you basically bank all the XP that you've collected within the time between the other save point into your save. That way, at a save point, you can level up and save your experience. This is how the developers have made the game a slightly easier version of Dark Souls. Also, when you kill the big bosses, you will be able to pick up their weapon, and you'll be able to use their weapon in the same style that they did. Certain iconic moves that bosses do will then be handed down to you, and then Harkin himself can do those iconic moves that probably killed you 100 or so times. Also, if you kill these bosses in very, very particular ways, the weapons you pick up from the boss will have added perks on them. So, for example, in the playthrough, the dev killed the boss in such a way that when he got his shield, he was able to do a shield kind of bash, where the shield kind of shot out a cone of energy that knocked down enemies. So that also adds for replayability for this game, because you'll want to perfect those boss battles to the point where you can pick up those perks. Furthermore, this game really promotes exploration, because the game will take you from A to B. But when you revisit those levels, which you can do, there will be new portals open to you which will take you to other levels where you can gain more gear and more experience, which will help you out in later battles against bosses. So the developers really promote the fact that you explore this game and take the time to go back and find new things on levels that you previously have done. Also, when it comes to attributes, the developers have said that you'll have a primary attribute and then a secondary attribute. Now that kind of means that when you're leveling up strength, it will increase your strength when you're fighting, but it will also increase how much you can carry. So you've got a secondary increase within the strength attribute. The attributes that we have are the typical ones that you can usually find in any role-playing game, aka Fallout 3. You've got endurance, strength, vitality, agility, luck, and an added one, faith, which will be for magic, I assume. Okay, after talking about those tidbits, let's go on to the classes. We have the option of 3 classes in this game: warrior, cleric, and rogue. Now, a rogue is for a more agile, fast-paced kind of playthrough. If you want to run around, do a lot of rolling, which is always helpful in these games, and have dual blades, then this is the class for you. Obviously, you can use any weapon, but that's the usual weapon associated with the rogue class. And the magic tree for the rogue class will be a lot of cloak and daggers kind of style. Distract the enemy, get round behind it, leech its health. You've also got the cleric, and their spell tree is very much for weakening enemies and healing yourself. So if you want to make your first playthrough a bit easier, the cleric will be a good playstyle to start with, because they have abilities to regenerate their health, which the rogue and the warrior do not. Obviously, if you're a warrior, you're pretty much all about the strength and the hack and slash. And obviously, if you are the warrior class, that's when the game will become really difficult, because you'll be using less magic and you'll be doing less rolling, and obviously you won't have that regen. And that are the 3 classes that we have in Lords of the Fallen. Now, what do I think of Lords of the Fallen? I think that the game has promise. I feel like the story could be really interesting and engaging. The combat sounds like a typical role-playing kind of system, and you've got that hack and slash. And because they don't want the game to be repetitive, I feel like you really have to think and engineer your moves, and you'll have fun crafting. You know, picking up the weapons, crafting them with runes. And I just feel like the game will always offer you something. You can go back and replay areas for new loot. And who doesn't love looting, right? So we've got a game here with massive bosses, awesome weapons, an interesting story. It sounds pretty good to me. But what are my worries? My worries with this game is that it won't stand up on its own 2 feet. It's been compared so much to Dark Souls that I feel like everyone will go into the game with certain expectations that might not be met. I feel like it's a baby game, and people will either sweep it under the rug or just give it too high expectations. But if we consider this as its own game, maybe it will be okay. I know that there have been certain issues talking about how the game moves very slowly, and hopefully they'll patch that before it is released. But for a new gen game, it looks beautiful. It's got combat and a style which we're familiar with, and I think that this game could be good. So if you're someone who loves the hack and slash genre and you want a role-playing game, I would go for this. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, because I think it shows a lot of promise, but there are a couple of drawbacks, as we're not sure what the finished product will be like, because there have been complaints about it being too slow, and I'm worried that the game isn't going to live up to everything it's said, and it won't be as good as its predecessors, such as Dark Souls. I hope you enjoyed my pre-review of Lords of the Fallen, and remember to pick up this game on the 28th or the 31st of October. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and share the video if you liked it and you thought it was informative. Also, I'd love to hear your comments when you get the game, because I unfortunately won't be able to get it. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about the game, and if my pre-review was right or wrong. And I'll see you next time for more pre-reviews, game discussions, and playthroughs. Happy gaming!
Reap what you sow. It's cheaper to pay as you go,